Hi, I'm Andy Villamarzo with SBLive Sports Florida, and thank you for joining us for episode 17 of the Coastal. Can't believe we made it this far, but hey, we got another guest on with us today. Special guest, Andre Fernandez, deputy editor with the Miami Herald, and he joins us to talk a little bit about the 954 and the 35 or 305. I'm sorry, I'm getting my area codes messed up there. I'm not, I actually was just down there. We just saw each other,
Yeah.
Columbus Homestead. And before I start on that game, you were just at a game that obviously national implications. Miami Norland and Miami Central at Traz Powell. Norland wins in a thriller 29-26, game winning field goal in overtime. I mean, for the Vikings, Andre, and obviously saw a lot of the pregame chatter, and then there was a little post-game scuffle, it looks like, between the coaches. Kind of tells you how much intensity and maybe dislike there is between these two programs, but obviously Norland's been looking to make a statement, and they just made one.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing coming into the season, since Norland had all those transfers, 27 guys that came in, basically overhauled half the roster in order to do this, in order to actually seriously contend for the Class 2M title. They knew they had to get deeper. They knew they had to get a more physical, bigger roster to be able to contend with the Central and the elite teams that are ranked nationally down here. And they did it. I mean, is it everything? No, because they probably have to do it again come playoff time. They're probably going to end up having to face them in either the second or third round. Maybe even face up Booker T. Washington or Northwestern in the playoffs too. But it's the first big step for them. Like this kind of put their foot in the door. This kind of announced, legitimized everything they've been saying for months that they can contend. And it's a huge win for confidence, I think. And it really kind of showed, again, like just this to me, this is the biggest, most physical roster they've had, the deepest roster they've ever had. Even when Duke Johnson was there back in 2011, obviously Duke was great at that level, but they didn't have so much at every position like they do now. But to still go in there and to still pull it off, especially the way they did, they fell behind 20-0, and they just did not let Central deliver that knockout punch early in the second half. Instead, they were the ones punching back. Got a touchdown. Their defense created some turnovers, and then to have the poise to beat them in overtime and hit that field goal, especially when they were having both sides were having all kinds of special teams issues in that game. The Central's kicker was injured, couldn't so they missed a bunch of extra points, and then Norland had two blocked. The young kid delivers anyway. Noah Sedan, the kicker for them, and now Norland is among the mighty. And really now it just comes down to kind of, harnessing what they've done and pushing forward to the playoffs. They have another good game this week against Columbus team that obviously we know is a defending state champion and has designs on winning Class 4M again. So it just continues from here for the Vikings. Can they continue to push forward and maybe do this again come November and December?
And flipping it from the Norland spectrum over to Miami Central, you're a team that three losses, all within one score. Bishop Gorman, Chaminade, Norland, 3-3. You're in a weird position because you don't see a Rockets team with three losses at this point in the season. Just Jude Joseph, we see those legendary kind of speeches he gives the team. I mean, what do you think he's telling these guys heading into the just final games here of the regular season? Obviously, still a contender in Class 2M, but I mean, a different feel to it as a contender.
Yeah, I mean, they've had years before where, it was always seemed to be Northwestern, where maybe they drop a game in the regular season to their biggest rival, and it was kind of deflating in the moment, but they knew they were going to get another shot. So I think Jube is kind of telling his team some of the things we just said right now, that you probably will see this team again. And when you do, they need to clean up the mistakes. They can't be turning the ball over the way that they have. They have to run the football better. That offensive line has got to block better for their running backs. And really, to me, the question all season was, how do these quarterbacks fit in? I mean, they lost a great one with Keon Jenkins last year, now the starter at FIU, and finally have kind of settled on two guys, but, still sort of rotating between the two. So how do those guys improve their play later in the season? JC Evans was used a little more in this game, showed some of the new, showed some RPOs that Booker T effectively used when they almost beat Norland themselves. But
Right.
how can him and Antonio Smith sort of carry that offense a little bit better? And those are the things that, when it comes to Central, the opportunity's still there. Yes, they lost the national title picture when they lost those games earlier in the year, especially after the Chaminade loss. But ever since then, Juba's been drilling into them. We can still complete our drive for five. We can still win this fifth championship. We can still make history. And even after this loss, they're still going to be in the playoffs and more than likely going to get a rematch against Norland if they are able to hold serve and continue to win and get to that regional final potential.
And that kind of tells you a little bit of the swagger that goes behind the Rockets. It's like 3-3, you still gonna feel good about yourself waking up. You still feel like someone's walking around like I still feel like a 10, but maybe on a bad day I'm a 9. And
Yeah,
that's sorry.
that's yeah, no, sorry. That's the thing. Their coaching staff, you got to remember, they go back even before Central. They were winning state championships. The core of their coaching staff was winning state championships at Northwestern. So these are guys that they ran out of fingers already to put how many championship rings they have. So
Yeah.
they've been through it, battle tested, all that stuff. So they're not going to panic, even though it's a it's a bit of a gut punch right now to lose that game. But they're not going to panic. It's not, they're by no means are they out of it, and they're going to make their kids believe that going forward.
And a team, I don't want to say they're panicking, but they picked up their first loss, and we were at that same game together. Just aforementioned it, that Homestead over Columbus on a Saturday night at Tropical Park. Homestead 32-16 over the Explorers. And maybe to some people, this isn't really a surprise because the Broncos obviously full of talent, but Columbus, I mean, this is a team coming off that Class 4M state championship. You got your James Madison commit, Alberto Mendoza there. Have really been playing good, security football with not giving up the football. But he has, I think, 5 interceptions we counted that night against the Broncos, and things kind of unraveled. And do you feel like that kind of drops them in your mind a little bit out of maybe repeating as state champions of Class 4M? And then where does a win like that take Ronnie Thornton in his first year with the Broncos?
Yeah, well, starting with I guess I'll start with Homestead. I mean, I think this was kind of it has to be to a degree an upset, but at the same time, I think it was more of a reminder. I think a lot of people, because of the loss early in the season to Palmetto, especially how ugly it was for them, 250 yards in penalties, they really hadn't beaten any real high caliber team since then. And people were kind of wondering, okay, what happened? They kind of
Yeah.
reminded everybody, we're still here. We're still here. We still have a shot in Class 3M. And to credit them, they're, Isaac Brown, the Louisville commit, returned a kick for a touchdown. He's running the football tremendously right now. I think they're actually giving him more carries than last season, and it shows how much of a weapon he can be in their offense. And Josh Townsend looked great, throwing the ball at Cortez Mills and other receivers. Now on the Columbus end, I mean, Alberto Mendoza, speaking of, ends up having a broken finger. Didn't even play last week against Doral. So that game was when he suffered that injury. He continued to play through it, and I think you could tell the
Yeah.
touch just wasn't there. And I'm not blaming entirely. Homestead made great plays. Their secondary made a lot of stepped up big. Their linebacker, Eduardo Nunez, guys like that. But you could tell it was a little bit off, and that contributed to a lot of those picks in that game. But Columbus overall, I mean, their defense is still very good, still one of the best in the state. Dalen Russell, Stevenson, all those guys. But their offense needs to get better if they're going to have a shot to run it back and win the 4M title. Because I think one thing they're missing this year, they have a couple of decent running backs, but they're missing a guy like Cedric Irvin that they had last year that did so much out of that backfield. He could, in the passing game, just game breaker, running the football. They haven't really found the guy that's emerged that way yet. And I think if
Yeah.
they can find even a semblance of that, maybe not to totally what he brought, but even get a little bit of that going to complement Mendoza in the passing game, then Columbus will be fine. They'll have a chance. I mean, realistically, it's not as daunting of a field as the 2M slate or the 3M slate that teams are going to face in 4M overall. So that might help too. That might help Columbus to at least get deep into the playoffs and before they face some of those heavyweights they're going to have to win another championship.
Yeah, and we go back to 2M because there's a team that I feel like has just been getting better and better, even though they got the one loss to Chaminade, and that's Plantation American Heritage. They lost their trio last year with Blake Murphy, Mark Fletcher, and then Brandon Ennis. But then you get you get a new trio here. You got Dia Bell, you got Byron Lewis, you got Malachi Tony. Obviously, this team now has this new sophomore trio that is they're just getting better every week. And I know there was a lot of kind of questions surrounding how good was Diabell exactly going to be. I think that was maybe like a lot of people thinking, oh, he's just a son of Rajah Bell.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of hype to him, but I think he's lived up to that hype, and the Patriots are reaping the benefits of this just sophomore trio of guys.
Well, if there's one team now, the one among the elite teams in South Florida that's I think set for the next 2-3 years for sure, if they keep it all together, it's Heritage because, like you said, all their main guys are either juniors, sophomores, freshmen right now. Like they barely have any seniors after they lost. I think it was 27 or some 26, something like that. So that was the concern. And Diabell had virtually no meaningful snaps ever at quarterback for this program until this season. So that
Yeah,
was the question mark. Like, how's he going to handle that? That's a high pressure program to get thrown into that situation, but he's responded. And is he a finished product? No, not yet. I mean, he's still learning, still developing. But I think that as good as he is now in week 9 compared to where he was in week 1, he's going to even be better by the time they were to get to the regional semis, regional finals, and so on, and try to make another run at this 2M title. But I mean, yeah, you mentioned those 3 names that you said: Brandon Bennett, Zamari Sanders, 2 more good receivers. I mean, I'm telling you, they are loaded.
yeah,
And let's not forget DeAndre Desanor, who came over
yeah,
from North Broward Prep. He is blazing speed. I mean, he's one of the fastest running backs I've ever seen down here. And to see what he did, I mean, he ran for 1,600 yards at North Broward, and now he's facing even tougher competition with the schedule Heritage does. And he's putting up potentially, if he didn't have to share the backfield, he'd have similar numbers already right now with some of the plays he's made. So yeah, I think Heritage cannot be discounted in Class 2M as much as we're talking about, Norland-Central, all the teams in Dade that are going to battle it out and probably beat each other up for 3 rounds.
yeah.
Heritage is probably going to be waiting on the other side of that bracket in Region 3 to see who comes out of that. So they're going to be right there.
Well, the one team they lost to, which when you go to Class 1M, probably not going to be as treacherous as the road to getting to the state championship. Chaminade,
Yeah.
obviously, run the table here with, and they faced a lot of the national kind of games you could think of. Bergen Catholic, they've obviously faced Miami Central. Just this team, and I tell people all the time because there's coaches up in these other areas because they don't see South Florida football. They're like, are they as good? It's almost like legendary. The Lions, they're like, are they that good? And I say, what you see on TV or what you might see on these highlights, they're that good. It's
Yeah.
like they're video game good.
Yeah, they have become video game good. It's funny because for a long time they had moments in the past, where they won a couple championships here and there, and they were a solid program. But this run that they're on now, where it's going for what 8 years in a row to make it to state, it'd be a record or tie a record, I believe, something like that. That's remarkable because you want to say in this day and age where some people discount coaching a little bit when it's more like talent acquisition, you name it, but whatever it is, to put a
Yeah.
program together like this with these elite guys. I mean, when you ask the question like who are the next South Florida guys to go to the NFL, you have to start with Jeremiah Smith and
Yeah.
what he's done. I mean, forget about what he'll do at Ohio State. I'm looking already at. I mean, this guy will be on fantasy draft boards in a few years. Just as a week 1 starter probably somewhere in the league because he's got the whole package. And then he's not the only one. I mean, you have 4 high caliber, potentially Power 5 or close receivers and then another Power 5 quarterback in Cedric Bailey, 2 guys in the
Yep.
backfield. And I say 2 because Bullet Gauze has been there forever, but the Arwen Jackson kid, freshman, has already stepped
Uh,
up. I think he's already run for 600 yards this year,
yeah.
especially now he's getting more reps because Bullet has been banged up the last few weeks. But the depth of this team and the defense is really
Yeah.
the surprise because a lot of people talked about the offense being amazing, but from the second half of that first game on, that defense has really played well. I mean, I think they've had at least an interception, maybe 2 interceptions every single game. They were on a run for a while with at least 1 pick six in every game. And it was during that stretch that they were playing 5 straight nationally ranked teams. So it's not like they were playing puff teams. Their schedule now is going to weaken a little bit since they're going to have to play their like obligatory district games and whatnot.
Yeah.
But that gauntlet they went through, I mean, even though 2 on the back end of that, Creek, Dillard is a good team. And
Yes.
they just mowed right through it 7-0. And honestly, like I don't see anybody that they'd face the rest of the way, even in Tallahassee, that probably should keep up with them, be within 3 touchdowns of them at least.
I know, and that's gotta hurt teams like Clearwater Central Catholic and Trinity Christian Academy, Mercy
Yeah,
Christian, and they're like these guys again. And
yeah.
I feel like no matter how you want to play them, and I thought St. Francis Academy in that first game at the Broward County Classic, they tried to invite the Lions into playing more of a grinded out in the trenches kind of game. And it's like they obliged and then
Hmm.
some and ahead because I was watching that game as you were just kind of like they've transformed from this high flying air raid type team to their ground and pound with bullet, and they don't have to be this flashy team. They could actually win by just handing it off.
Yeah, they
And
can. Yeah, they can beat you in every which way. And I think of all the teams down here, even among the good ones, someone you kind of out of all of them, you sort of look at and say, okay, Central can beat you this way, this way. Not so sure they can beat you through the air as well this year. Maybe you can say the same thing for a Columbus or another team. But Chaminade can beat you every which way, even special teams, because they block kicks. They're so good even on that end, on that in that phase as well. I mean, they're the most complete team down here. And not to put not to look at the crystal ball yet and get too far ahead, but it's like I wish now that they're 1-2, you almost wonder, can we have a rematch of last year with Bishop Gorman? Because now that they're top two, that would be amazing to see. I'd be curious to see. I mean, nothing last year, what Bishop Gorman just mauled them up front as we
yeah,
saw, running the ball. But I wonder if now, because of what we were talking about, I wonder if Chaminade could have put up a better fight and maybe we'd get a better game if those two clashed. I mean, for the national championship, really 1-2.
well, and something I said, last take on them is just at the Broward Classic. I almost wish with Aquinas and Bosco and Chaminade and St. Francis, we could have flipped the teams. We could have
Mm-hmm.
seen Bosco, Chaminade, St. Francis, Aquinas, because it looked like, and we'll jump into Aquinas here, but Aquinas looked for probably the first time in a long time in the trenches, a little over, little overwhelmed. And then with St. Francis, they just in that Florida Heat, that first game, they were outmatched. But you feel like if you put the two teams together, kind of switch the matchups, heck, we could have had probably Bosco and Chaminade. Those have been really two of the top three teams in the country, if you really think about it. So
Yeah, that could have
that's
been a little sneak peek at that type of matchup too that we were just talking about. Like that national championship caliber
yeah.
matchup would have had it in week one.
Exactly. Well, talking about Aquinas, we can't go without talking about the top teams without talking about the Raiders here. And obviously, yeah, they lost the first game, but then they've came back to being themselves. Obviously, that kind of controversial one against Coco. We've talked a lot about that, but I mean, other than that, this team has kind of gone through the season. I mean, what's your take on the Raiders now and just kind of how they've gone about the season? And do you feel like it's just inevitable they're going to win number 5 in a row in Class 3M?
Yeah, I mean, I think since that game that you mentioned against Coco, because that game, again, it was just a crazy finish, and realistically, probably should have been that loss number 2 for them. But that being said, even within that game, they came back, they battled Coco, and we've seen what Coco's done since. They've been destroying people left and right since that game, showing you how good they are. But it looked like their offense finally got going, and then it was just signature Aquinas. Beat you up front with those big guys on both lines, and their skill is just always 2-3 deep at every position. And this year is no different. I mean, they have so many weapons. The running game with Lyle, with Gage, and then the receivers with Madison and those guys. It was similar to Heritage in the sense of, can the quarterback position develop and really become more effective? And
Right.
Andrew Indorf, he's had ups and downs, been a little bit better as of late. I mean, I know they've been also playing another quarterback there. So that's the key thing. I think if they stabilize that, and whoever it is can carry them to that next level, especially in the big games that are to come in the playoffs, then yeah, I think they have to be the favorite still to win Class 3M. But are they a hands down favorite like Chaminade? I don't think so, because 3M is tougher. 3M is a lot tougher. I think Homestead that we talked about before, they're going to be in the mix, and Coconut Creek this year
Yeah.
took it to Chaminade, almost came out on top,
Yeah.
and their defense can match up with pretty much anybody physically. So they're one of those teams that if they end up playing Aquinas and they can hang in there for a half, and maybe it's a low scoring game, maybe it's, I don't know, 10-7, whatever it is, maybe even the head at the half, and they feel like they can have a chance. Believe it or not, that's a defense that can wear you down and make you make mistakes. So that's another team that's dangerous, and they're in that same region with St. Thomas. But I'd say those two are the biggest obstacles. But still, Aquinas, as of right now, is on top. They're the team to beat until proven otherwise.
Well, and a team I wanted to bring up that I wanted to ask you, I got to see them once in St. Petersburg. They played Northeast. Cardinal Gibbons. This has been a team that they've won state titles in the past. Obviously, kind of starting to see them maybe fall off just a little bit. And Matt DeBuck, one of the top head coaches down there, I mean, obviously has to be a little frustrated at, kind of the season they've had. I mean, what's your take on the Chiefs right now? I mean, I know Michael Merdinger. He's a North Carolina commit. He's had his moments, good moments, and then some bad. But I mean, what's your take on these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it right there with not to put it all on him, but I think Merdinger's play has to be a little more consistent. He's had flashes where he's shown why Carolina wanted him in the first place, but he's also had some games where you also wonder that same question. And I think that's been a little frustrating because I think they felt they could elevate that position this season. And there's still time. There's still time. Maybe he can now late in the playoffs. They put together a kind of under the radar tough schedule. They're not facing like major nationally ranked teams, but they're not facing bad teams either. They went up and beat Northeast up in St. Pete. They're going to play Boca Raton, which is a solid playoff team this week. The problem is they got a little exposed in the Heritage game just because of Heritage had so much speed, and it's like they ran circles against their defense in that game. And I think that's the thing. If their Heritage is waiting for them once again in the region, I could see Gibbons easily getting back to round 3, facing them again,
Yeah.
and I haven't seen anything in the last few weeks that makes me think it would be something drastically different, unfortunately for Gibbons, because that Heritage is so stacked in terms of that speed, talent, and everything. And that's the one thing Gibbons has it in spots with some of their players, some of their roster, and their O line was supposed to be much, much better. And I think now in recent weeks it's starting to show that.
Yeah.
But that speed dimension is what you need to beat someone like Heritage. And unfortunately, it's hard to see them matching that later on this year.
And just with the two matchups they had last year, I remember those Heritage Cardinal Gibbons games, they were close. They were like defensive battles. And then this time around, one matchup they had, obviously Heritage showed their superiority in terms of speed and athleticism. I mean, even if Cardinal Gibbons can make a run, get to that region final, just do you feel like there's any way if there's a rematch, they could slow the game down, make it to where they can make it like a game from last year?
Only way is if they can run the football, and that comes with that O line that I just mentioned. If they can kind of establish some dominance early in that game and maybe run the ball, you eat up as much clock as you can. Got to keep Heritage's offense off the field. That's the only way. But I think they did try that a little bit in the first game, but then they tried to mix in a little bit with Merdinger, and it just wasn't sharp early on, and kind of fell behind. Kind of just at that point, it sort of just spiraled from there. But they need to create some turnovers, and they need to just pound the rock. Basically just keep that Heritage team on the side, that offense on the sideline as much as possible. That's the only way they're even gonna have a prayer of a shot. And they got to go right back to Heritage too and play them at their place, just like they did in the first meeting. So yeah, I just see it as a very tall order for this team this year to do it. But yeah, if you ask me the blueprint for even having a chance to do it, that would be it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna go to another team that I wouldn't say they've had downs. I mean, they've had a couple losses, but they lost their top running back to Mazel to an injury. That's Western. Obviously, you got Davi there at quarterback. He's been probably I don't know, maybe the toughest kid in South Florida. I think I saw a hit he took going into the end zone, and he looked like he got sandwiched by like 3 guys. And but it showed you kind of the toughness that he brings to that quarterback position for Western. And I mean, what do you foresee for this team kind of the rest of the way?
Yeah, I love Davi in that sense because I mean he's been showing that since Gulliver. I remember last year there was a game they were playing for the district title against South Miami, and he just got clocked. I mean, like I think it was a back injury. he was back he could have played a couple weeks later. Like he even told me in the offseason, he's like, I was fine. And I'm like, you look like you just got split in half that day. And he was like, no, 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 not that. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. He's tough. He's tough. His
Yeah.
dad is the former UFC fighter.
Yeah.
You know, he learned that from his dad, and just, you know, just a really tough-minded kid. And he's been everything for them on offense, especially like you said, since Mizell got hurt at the beginning of the season. That really kind of, I don't want to say crippled their offense, but it really, the offense really took a hit because they had big plans to make this a dangerous, balanced offense with him running the ball, with Davi being able to do both as a dual threat
Yeah.
quarterback. And it kind of turned them one dimensional for a long time early in the season. Now they're starting to find a little more of a rhythm. They showed it against Cypress Bay. They locked up the district title. They've got good receivers. It's just a matter of can they protect Davi and not have him running for his life all the time back there, risking getting hurt. And their defense is underrated too. I think their defense is one of the better ones in South Florida. If they play well, they've got a good test coming up this week with Miramar. Big picture, they're in there with Columbus. They're in there with Palmetto. I could see it as a 50-50 game with Palmetto. If they face Columbus, the only way they win is that if that defense forces turnovers the way Homestead did the other day. If they can do that, even the game out and have a chance maybe and not, you know, just let Columbus, you know, score left and right early on in the game. But it's going to be hard for them to score themselves on Columbus's defense, especially if they have put it all on Davi. They've got to have some sort of balance to make it happen. It last year was the shame. They got to the second round and lost their quarterback back then, and it
Yeah.
just derailed their whole season. So this year, if Davi can stay upright, if he can stay healthy, they'll have a chance in that region to compete.
I definitely don't want to see him taking those 3-4 person
No,
sandwiches. I guess that's just he gets it from his dad, who is UFC fighter. He's gonna take those hits and he's gonna
yeah,
get back up, and he's like, hey, let's play.
yep,
So well, we
yeah,
got the best of the rest, because I'm sure if we want to talk about all these South Florida teams that got talent, we could probably go on for who knows how long. But uh, point out a team to me, or teams
yeah.
that you feel are kind of under the radar that could really make some noise, or maybe have surprised you this season.
Yeah, well, Creek that we mentioned before was definitely one of them. I think, you know, they're like I said before, their defense is really good. You know, they have a few underrated guys on offense. James Hayes, the quarterback. You know, Jamari Holsclaw, the running back for them. You know, some talent there on both sides of the ball, and I think they'll have a threat for Aquinas. But there's a team that's starting to impress a little bit down here. What sucks for them is they're trapped in 1M. So they got destroyed last year in the state semis by Chaminade, and that's True North Academy. True North
Uh,
Academy is starting to get a lot better. Let me tell you, that program down here is getting good at every sport. Football is right there with it.
yeah.
And I don't think they're not yet in that vein where they can take down a Chaminade, I think, but they're starting to show that they probably narrowed the gap a little bit because they've shown it against some good competition. The other day they had their first loss. They started off 6-0, beat First Baptist of Naples,
Yeah.
and then came up short against Bradford, but were close. A couple plays go their way, and they might have had a shot to win that game. And that's saying something for a fourth year program there at True North. So, and I think they have Kings Academy coming up this week, another solid team in Palm Beach, another good opponent. So
Yeah.
they beefed up their schedule, and it's showing the benefits of that now because it's still a very young team. A lot of their kids are freshmen, sophomores. The interesting part is going to be if they can keep it together because we know how it is. You have a team of mostly underclassmen, and the vultures come and try to take all your kids. So it's trying to see exactly. So it's trying to see if they can keep that. But if they can, Zach Katz at quarterback. He's already been their
Yeah.
quarterback for, I believe, this is his third season. J. Rock Lopez, the wide receiver, is one of the best overall. I think that, and he's still only a sophomore. Plays basketball too, accomplished athlete. So it's a strong core, and I think that team will. I mean, I'd be shocked if they're not in the Final Four again. And this time, who knows? I mean, maybe. I mean, last year their schedule wasn't that strong, so they were the 4 seed, so they drew Chaminade in the semis. But because of the strength of schedule they've had, I mean, I know the power rankings had them in the top 50. Maybe they sneak into the 2-3 matchup in 1M. And depending on the matchup, might have a shot. Who knows? Maybe we got a True North Chaminade rematch, but this time it's in Tallahassee for the title. Now, like I said before, I don't think they're ready for that, but it's another good step for their program if they can at least get to the dance and maybe, you know, show off what they've got, maybe at least put a little more respectable showing.
Yeah. Fourth year program being in a state championship. I think anyone would buy into that.
Right.
Like, that's good news for them. How about a player, Andre, or maybe players? Are there any kids that you feel like out of the, obviously Jeremiah Smith, so you got the Diabels of the world. I mean, these guys are obviously the kind of the household names we talk about all the time, but anyone that you feel like is under the radar that's on the rise that we haven't mentioned already?
Well, there's a few kids, I mean, here and there. I mean, I know one that unfortunately got hurt was Booker T's quarterback, Claudel Sherman. We saw his worth and how big he's been. I mean, I think he's had a phenomenal season. Unfortunately, he had that collarbone injury. I don't know if he's going to be back, but it showed you how valuable he was for them because their offense has gone in the tank the last 2 weeks, and they're hoping to pry it and get it going again before the playoffs to have any chance. Um, there's a lot of guys. I mean, one kid that I wouldn't say he's totally under the radar, but I like him a lot is EJ Marcelin over at Central. I think he stepped into Ruben Bain's shoes and taken off. I mean, he's not. I wouldn't say he's right there at a Ruben Bain level yet, but he like against Norland, I believe it was 8 tackles for loss. He had 4 sacks. He was all over the field.
Oh,
Even came off, I think, with 4 minutes left, and he looked like he was heaving. He was like, that's how much he was running everywhere. Went right back in a few minutes later. I mean, I have a lot of respect for what this kid's been able to do this year, especially at a program like that, pressure
yeah,
packed situation to come in and be asked to kind of fill those shoes. I mean, even though when they bring in a guy like an Armando Blunt to
yeah.
help right there, still he is the playmaker back there at linebacker that is just all over the field. And I'm excited to see what he can do in the postseason. And if Central is going to recover from these 3 losses and still make history and make the run, he's going to be right at the heart of it.
Oh yeah. I mean, still the Rockets have a ton of talent. No reason to believe they can't
Oh,
get back to the Final Four. It's just a matter of
yeah.
can they get to that final, and
What?
that's where
Yeah.
could we see
What other kid I would say real quick is Joshua Townsend, the quarterback at Homestead. I just remembered he's another one that I've liked him for 3 years now. I think he doesn't have the prototypical size, and that's why maybe he's not getting the big blue chip offers and all that. But
right.
this kid's got heart. I think he's one of those a big arm, can run, dual threat guy, very similar to Enio Yapur at Norland. Very similar stories, the two of them, in terms of why how their recruiting is going and the kind of players they are. They seem like the types that they could go to a smaller D1 and light it up, and then who knows? Maybe with the transfer portal, who knows what could happen? They could be kind of like Keon Jenkins, that maybe goes to an FIU and shines and maybe earns a starting role right away if someone takes a chance on him. But yeah, I'd say those are 3 right there.
Yeah, and I think he was limping around just a little bit in that Columbus game, but he kind of like Davi, he's just like tough kid. He
Yeah,
just got like play this one out. I don't think even if Coach Thornton wanted to take him out, he was going to let that even happen because he knew there was an upset kind of in the mix right there. So he wanted to lead his troops to a win. So,
yeah. And Homestead
well,
says it all the time, like they're not this good without him. Because I mean, he's the leader. He's the engine that's driving this whole thing last year and this year again for them.
well, could maybe see Homestead and Aquinas again. Maybe that could be outside matchup that happens again
Like,
in the yeah.
yeah, let me talk. It could be you could have Dade Broward games like you had 2 last year. I mean, maybe if True North gets there, it makes 3. But yeah, you could have the rematch of Homestead Aquinas, and then I mean Heritage. It could be Heritage Norland this time around, or a rematch of last year too.
Yeah, and I'd ask you your thoughts on the drive for all those teams having to go all the way to Tallahassee, but I'm sure that's for a whole nother segment.
Yeah, I mean Chaminade used to it at least.
Yeah.
That's the one thing they've won their last few up there. But yeah, kind of stinks for the other guys if they get there to have to go and then that's the irony too. You have if you do end up having 2, maybe 3 Dade versus Broward state championship games, and then oh yeah, let's go play them at the other end of the state, completely on the other side, up in the Panhandle almost.
Yeah, that's well, no matter what, I will very like I will say 99.9% sure I'm gonna see you over at Bragg Stadium up there in Tallahassee. Sure, South Florida will be well represented, and we'll have to touch base here again soon, closer to I would say the region final round to touch on all these South Florida teams that are going to make their deep runs. So, Andre, thank you for coming on with us again here on the Coastal, and look forward to talking again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Andy. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. That's Andre Fernandez of the Miami Herald talking South Florida football. Thank you for joining us for episode 17 of the Coastal.